everyone, it's Alyce from Keegan online colouring classes, and welcome to my festive deer colouring class for the scrapbooking fun retreat. In this class, I'm going to be taking you through a crash course on fine lines and how to apply the fine lines textures to colouring up your animal images to create fur. We'll be looking at the animal contouring on this little deer. I've given you the image in both a black outlines and a no lines, which is a soft grey version of the image to print out. Now it's totally up to you which version you choose to use. They both colour exactly the same way. The no lines will just give you a little bit of a softer and more realistic look, because if you look around your room right now, we don't have black outlines around things. So if you stamp your images in a soft grey or print them out in a soft grey, it's always going to have a little bit more realism to that. Now the trick with creating the realism with a soft grey outline is through utilising what we call light source to help you with where to place your shading. Now we always have to go over a quick crash course in light source before we colour anything, just to help you with understanding why behind where we're placing our shading here today. Now when we colour anything at all, we want to imagine a big cone of light coming down from above and hitting our image. The way that we think about this is any part of our image here that is popping up toward us, our light rays come down and hit raised up areas first, and it'll make those areas appear the lightest and brightest, and we call them our highlights. Now the parts of the image that are slanting, curving down, or just lower than other areas are our form shadows. They're furthest from the light. And in between our highlight and our form shadow, we have our midtone. And midtone is generally the true color of the object because it's not affected by your light or your shade. One more important theory that we're going to touch on is a cast shadow. Now, when we have a lot of overlapping elements in our scenes, if we have an object above or in front of something else, the object that's below or behind will get the shadow on it. You can see here I've got my pencil duster overlapping my hand and the shadow that's on my hand. It's being cast by this object above. So it's going to help to show levels and distance between objects. This is what will help to take your colouring to the next level and create a lot of depth in your work. It's something that's often forgotten by our stampers and colorists because it's an actual art foundational theory, and we have to actually learn those theories in order to start applying them in our colouring. Now I know that's a lot of information to take in if you're brand new to light source. If you head over to my website, keeganclatter.com, after the retreat of course, I have a lot of colouring classes to teach you all of this and a lot more beginner basic detail for you today and to break all of that down. And there's a bunch of free classes that you can try on the homepage for markers and pencils as well. But we're going to take what we just went through now and apply this to colouring our image here today. Alright, now when it comes to colouring up our deer, we're going to keep in mind all of those light source basics that I just went through at the start of this video tutorial. So we need to be thinking about what parts of the deer are popping up toward us, so they're going to be our lightest parts, and what parts are rounding away or further back down to form our shadows. So when I look at the deer here, I want to look for major parts that are sitting in front or above, so remembering that cast shadow. So for example, I've got the head here and I can see that the head cuts straight over the ears. So our ears are set slightly back from the front of the face. So we get this nice deep dark shadow around them so we can show those different levels. I have the foliage here around the neck, which is sitting in front of the body. So we get a nice deep dark shadow back here to show that that body is further behind. And it's also further behind the front arms. So the arms here popping forward are a lot lighter than the areas surrounding them. You'll notice that we have the white fur of the chest. And even though this is a nice lighter colour, we still get the shadow underneath from the arm above. It's important that when you colour white objects, we still keep in mind those light source basics that we went through. So if I hold something over my white piece of paper, even though the piece of paper is still white, you'll see how dark the shadow gets on it. So we still want to come in there with dark colours so we can show all of that difference in the levels. As the body rounds around, it gets darker on these outer edges here, showing the dimension and that it's curving through. And that's the same in the face as well. So we think of the face like a sphere, the edges are rounded as that sphere is curving away from us. Typically the fur is going to emanate in a circle around our nose area. So you'll notice all of these strokes come out from the nose area and continue around in a circle. And then as I come from the outer edge, it's the same thing. They're always coming back in toward that center. The forehead area here is generally a little bit lighter as that part is popping forward toward us. And then the face sort of curves in and down toward that nose. We come into the wider fur around the eyes and the mouth area. But again, I still have that shadow in and around there so I can show the areas that are lowered down. Okay, now before we jump into actually doing our coloring, let's do a really quick crash course on fine lines. So I've just got my uncolored image here. Now, whenever you practice fine lines, you always want to practice on your actual blending card. And if you're using alcohol markers here today, please make sure you're always using the right cardstock with them. It's very, very important because not only does that help you get a really nice blend, but it helps you save your ink. And ink is more expensive than paper. So we always want to be using a good quality bleed-proof cardstock. And that helps the ink to sit on the surface of the page for longer so we can really work on our blending. Now, when I practice my fine lines, I hold my marker nice and close to the nib and I hold the marker upright so I'm working on that point. Now, you'll notice that I'm resting my marker on my second last finger here. A lot of people may rest their marker on the last finger, but I'll show you what the problem is with that. As we come to lower our hand to the page, if my marker is on my last finger, I'm hitting the piece of paper very quickly. If I raise it up on my second last finger, as I lower my hand to the page, it's not actually touching, which means I have the control to lower the marker down and have a softer touch. Now, when I come to doing a stroke with my markers, I don't want to place the marker and flick. If I do this, you'll notice here that I get a little dab where I place the marker down, and I get quite a thick flick there. What I want to think about doing is instead of drawing with the marker, I want to think about lowering the marker toward the page, but then moving my hand back and forth, and the marker just trails along and hits the page as my hand moves. That then allows me to do curves or all different shapes and still achieve a fine line. So it's not about drawing with the marker, it's about moving your hand and getting that soft stroke. The other thing we want to keep in mind when doing fur is it's equally as important to have a gap between your strokes. So when I do my strokes here, it doesn't matter how thick my strokes are or how fine they are. If they are close together like this, it's always going to look thick. What I want to think about doing is instead of having my strokes stacked together, I want to space them apart and get gaps between. Now we call the space between an object the negative space. And we need to have negative space around an object in order for it to have form. So when I'm doing my texture strokes, if I have a gap between each of them, you'll notice here, now they look more defined. So it doesn't matter how thick those strokes are, if you're leaving a gap, it's always going to look textured. But if those strokes are close together, it's always going to look thick and blended. So let's work on separating those strokes today, rather than focusing on how fine our strokes are. Fine lines only comes with time and practice, and you have to sometimes do some practices you don't love. So remember, as you follow this tutorial today, even if you don't love the outcome, it's helping you with refining your marker control, which is helping you to get more of an understanding and more knowledge around how to use your markers, which means every practice going forward from now, you can employ these techniques and work on refining that. And as you do more and more, it will get easier. Remember, if you feel challenged at any point during this class, that's a great thing. It's actually showing you where there is a gap in your skill set and to seek out the classes that challenge you, because that is where you have the room to grow. So anytime you do a class and you think that was pretty tricky, that is actually what you want to be looking for and aiming to actively seek out those challenges. It's always great to do things you're comfortable with and to do classes where you can really smash them and be like, this is my finished piece and I've created this beautiful image here today. But in those classes, you aren't learning as much. So look for the ones that are pushing you a little bit further out of that comfort zone so you are challenged, and practice those ones, and that's how you're going to see the most improvement. My classes always come with free private tutoring as well, so if you feel stuck at any point, please feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to assist one-on-one with some personal tips on your colouring. Alright, now that we've gone through those basics, I think it's time for us to get started. I'm going to get us started today with a lighter colour, my E31, and I'm going to map in all the shadows on my image. That way I can feel comfortable where all the placement is going to be before coming in with a darker colour. So if I make any mistakes, you won't see what you do with this step. So don't be nervous at all of this step. We can go and make as many mistakes as possible and really practice our technique. So using my E31, I'm going to come in and along the side of the face and follow the strokes that have been already drawn in for us. So I'm using them as a bit of a guideline and just extending the whole way through. Now your strokes don't need to sit directly on top of what I've done here. You're just following that basic general shape. And remember, always coming in toward that nose area. As you're working here, you'll notice that I am leaving a gap between those strokes so my texture is nice and visible. So I'm lifting the marker after each one, leaving a space, and then laying down the next stroke. I'm going to come in from that nose area as well and extend the whole way around the eyes. And again, following that circular shape. You can see I'm layering up just small little strokes and I get closer in toward the center, lifting and layering. My strokes are slightly different lengths as well, which helps me to get a little bit more variation in the fur. Now, as I come around the side of the head, I want to draw in a nice thick shadow. So I'm coming in and around those strokes, drawing in a thick shadow, and then doing my strokes from there. So your shadow should always be thicker than your actual fur strokes. And that's going to give you that differentiation between your levels. As we come down to the body now, I'm going to continue that thick stroke underneath all that foliage. I'm doing this nice and thick so I can really see the levels between these objects, between the body that's further back down. And we could even come around the arm there as well so we can really show that these areas are behind. And then from there, we'll do our strokes extending through. There's a little part of the body in here that we don't really see. I'm just adding a little bit of the darker color there. So we can see that that is considerably behind. Bit of a car shadow there around the side of the arm as well. And you can see I'm always extending these strokes out from my shadows. So not just leaving them as lines, working through that textured stroke. Coming around the side of the body, and we're doing the same thing, following that shape around, adding into the shadow here where the body would be curving around and away from our light. And we can create a bit of thickness by layering those strokes up and into that body area. I'm working quickly and a little bit messily here to really emphasize that texture as well. We don't need it to be super neat and uniform, especially when coloring animals. A little bit of messiness will always help it to look a lot more natural. If you find you struggle with messy, try speeding yourself up a little bit. I find when we're taking a lot of care and we're really thinking about our strokes, they tend to not only be thicker, but they tend to look very precise, which we want to move past a little bit. Now we can create some spots through the body here as well by just very lightly tapping our marker to the page and drawing spots of all different sizes. There's no right or wrong with that pattern. You can do as many or few as you like. And you may also do some in the forehead as well. Alright, continuing around on the tail, and I'm going to split the tail between white and this tan color here as well. So you can see I just went straight through the center with the strokes. And then my other leg, extending that around. Okay, now before I move on to my other colors, I'm going to just do that white fur. So I've got a little bit of my W3, and I'm going to extend this up through that chest area. Same thing that we were just doing. I'm just making sure that I use a color that's still fairly light, but dark enough that we can actually still see it, because we really still want to see how that white is impacted by light and shade and the levels that's happening here. I'm also going to bring this color into the face, so come around the foliage because the foliage is sitting in front of the face there. So we want to always apply our shadow on the object below or behind, which is the face. Then from there, we extend our strokes up just a short way and always spacing out my strokes. So I'm not drawing with the strokes, I'm just allowing my hand to move back and forth a little. With this color, I'm going to do a little bit around the mouth area as well, and even into the base of my ears. I'm then going to grab my W1 and I'm going to go straight over what I've just done and extend up a little. Again, make sure that your strokes are all different lengths so the color doesn't just end at the same point, creating a line. I do notice that I forgot the little white part of the tail, so I'm just coming around that as well. And then we use the W1 and just fading in the chest and tail area with strokes that are all nicely spaced out still. Okay, now once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and darken up the shading in the deer fur. So I've got a little bit of E39 and I'm going to focus this in my very shadow areas. So I want you to think about the parts that are further behind that we added the thicker shading to earlier. So like in the ear area here. So we can come around that fur that was in front, adding in our nice thick shadow, and then from there we extend our strokes up and out. And the same on the other side. The nice thick cast shadow, and then your individual strokes. So you can essentially just trace along what you did earlier here. I do want to come into the side of the face going to be darker as it curves around. A little bit into the under side of the ears, and then a little bit just at the very bottom of the very top of the nose area. I might extend this around the very top of the hair, so I'm not using a lot of the color through here, but just picking up a little bit of a shadow on that edge as it rounds away. Now, around the foliage, we do have a very strong cast shadow because that whole section is behind. So I'm going to come in a lot thicker with the color through here, applying my cast shadow first around the arm and around the foliage, and then extending my strokes through. And that whole area can get a lot darker so we can really see the difference in those levels. And then we can extend our strokes the whole way around. And we obviously don't have a lot of time here today in the retreat to go through these techniques in a huge amount of detail like I would in our usual classes in terms of things like contouring and lighting. So if you would like to learn a lot more about that with me, make sure you check out my website at kitandclouder.com, as all of my classes really take the time to break these techniques down so that they make a lot of sense so you can apply them to other images after class as well. I also have a lot of free classes, including my free Markers 101 class, which breaks down how to do all the different strokes in a lot more detail. It breaks down what is light source in a lot more detail as well. So you may find going through those fundamentals in a bit more of a leisurely pace very helpful. Today, it's just about giving you a crash course in these foundations so you can start your learning journey and hopefully enjoy colouring up this little deer for any of your festive or even non-festive projects as well. But I'd like to mention that just because I know sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming learning a lot of techniques very quickly. And if that's the case for you, that's absolutely okay. Again, it's just showing you that what we're learning is new, and when something challenges us, it generally is just because we don't have a lot of practice in it yet. So this is the start of building up that practice. Now that I've added in that darker colour, all of that contouring should start to be making a little bit more sense. We start to see the shadows in individual sections. Now we want to move to our next lightest colour, which is E35, and I'm just going to go straight over what I've just done and start to extend in a little bit further. So now I'm bringing it in toward the centre of the face and coming around the eye areas. I'm just following along the edge, what I started doing at the very start of the tutorial, and then just extending those strokes further in and down. If you meet any of these shapes, just stop your strokes where they are as well, and make sure that as you're laying down these strokes, that you are still spacing them out by leaving a gap between them. That's really important, making sure that that texture really stands out. Moving in now to a little bit of your E33, and all we're doing is we're literally just repeating now, so the technique remains the same. You go over what we've done previously and start to extend throughout the rest of the areas. Now I'm coming toward these little spots that I created in the face, so I'm just coming around them as I do my strokes, and you can see I'm taking a little bit of care. If I meet the edges of them, I'm still doing my little strokes up to them. So you don't really want to outline them like a circle. Our little strokes are coming toward them now, so the fur remains textured the whole way through. I'm still spacing out my strokes with a gap between them so that the fur texture is nice and prominent as well. And I'm just following the shape in and around. Again, don't be afraid to work quickly and even a little bit messy with your stroke, which will help to break it up a little. And everything should come together with our last color, which is my E31. And now with this color, again, the same thing, but this color is nice and soft. So as you extend this color around, we should be starting to fade out to the white of the paper. Now, as you use this color, we start to cover the remaining area. And you'll notice again coming into those dots, and I'm just doing little dabs. I'm ensuring that I still space out my strokes. It's very, very important that we still space everything out so that even our highlight has texture as well. I'm going to color up toward my eye area here, but I'm leaving this bottom area still light. I'm going to bring this color down along the side of the nose and extend some little strokes up from there as well. Just going to be nice and soft. You come up to those little spots, make sure that you do little dabs. So rather than outlining, those little spots look like they still have texture as well. For a little bit of variation, I've got a little bit of R11, which I'm going to bring into my ears here. So I'm just going to do some nice strokes of this for a little bit of pink. And I'm going to dab this into my cheeks. Now I'm just dabbing close to the eyes and feathering out to either side. And then I very quickly swap into my R000. And with this color, I'm just going over the edges, which gives me a really nice fade out of this color. If you don't have the R000, you can always use the colorless blender, which will further help to dilute that color down a little bit so you get the fade. Coming into the little feet and the sides of the ears, I've got a little bit of W9. I'm going to apply the W9 along the tops of my ears and just extend some strokes down. I'm going to bring this into the little feet by applying down the side as a cast shadow around the fur and through that center area. So essentially we're doing flicks up into the fur so we can show the negative space between the fur strokes. So if you have fur and it's spaced out, you see what's underneath it. So by coming in with the black around the fur and extending my strokes up, I'm showing that you see the hooves beneath that fur. Now I'm going to blend out with a little bit of W5. I'm coming into the tops of my ears. And then a little bit of W3. That's just going to come down into the hooves, and I'm just going to fade this so you get a little pop of white right before you hit that center line, and that's going to create a bit of a shine. So if you want to create a shiny look, always leave just a little touch of white. And in talking about that, we're going to do that in the eyes as well. Now before I come to adding in the black, I'm going to add the color of the iris by grabbing my E35 and just doing shading from the two sides of the eye here. So I wanted to show you how you could add detail if an image doesn't already have this drawn in. Grab your E31 and connect those two sides in a curving stroke, and then you've got your iris. Now you can grab your W9 here, or if you're a little bit uncomfortable with fine lines, you can always use a black fine liner or colored pencil. And I'm just tracing around the eye shape first and foremost. And then I'm going to create a curving U shape here and then add the shading to the pupil. Now there are two little circles drawn in. I'm just shading around those so I can create a shiny highlight, so leaving a little bit of white in the center. If you lose that, you can always use a white gel pen to add it back in. I'm also going to come around the side of the eye and add in that detail and just flick out a few little lashes, and you can do as many or few as you like. So we can trace around the outer edge, add in the lashes, then create our U shape. And that is quite wide and connects into the top and comes into the sides a little as well, which helps to direct your gaze down. And once you've done that, you can grab your W5 and I just extend my shading down into the sides of the iris just a little to deepen that up. Coming back with the W9, I'm just going to trace the mouth area. Again, you can always use a black pencil or a fine liner if that's more comfortable for you. And I'm going to trace my nose area. Now, as I come into the nose, what I'm going to aim to do is just split the nose of the line toward the middle and add my shading from the middle of the nose into those two sides. W5, and I'm going to fade that out a little bit toward the edges and around the top, leaving just a little strip of white for a nice shiny highlight. Coming into my little antlers, and I just want them to be lighter than my fur color. So I'm going to use E33, which I'm going to apply between each of those little curving shapes and then at the base of my antlers. I'm going to fade that out with a little bit of E31, so just keeping them nice and light. We're almost done. And I'm going to bring us into the foliage. Now, with the foliage here, I've used only two colors for each blend because it's a very, very small area. So usually we would use 3 colors for a blend to represent your highlight, midtone, and shadow. Today, we're just going to use 2 and work on leaving a little bit of white as our highlight. So I'm going to start us off with our YG67, and I'm going to add this into my leaves, applying to the underside of each leaf shape. Don't forget any cast shadows, so if you've got any flowers that are sitting in front, you'll notice I'm adding a shadow just coming around each of these. Now some of these may be a little bit tricky for you to see because they're small. I want you just to do your best. At the end of the day, you're the only one that knows if you go out of the lines at any point or if you've created any new lines as well. A little tip on smaller areas is you can apply your shading on the other side of the outline and no one's going to know. That gives you a little bit more room inside the lines. I'm going to grab my YG23 now and I'm going to shade this out into each of the leaves. So we're just aiming on getting a little bit of contrast in the blend so we can still show that these small objects are still affected by light and shade like the rest of our image. I'm grabbing my Y15 and just dabbing into the little circles that are in and around the image. We have some little pink roses there. I'm going to grab my R81 and just trace over these little shapes. And then I grab my R85 and I'm just going to swirl this along the shape. It doesn't need to be perfectly on top of the outline, so just swirl it through as best you can for a little bit of contrast. And then we have a few little blooms there. I'm going to start us off with the red one. So I'm going to start with R35 and I'm just going to dab straight in the center, and then this color comes down the outline between each petal. So I'm going to do this one, the little one on the outer edge, and this little one down here. And then I swap into my R32 and I'm just going to trace around each petal. And if you can, leave a little bit of white through the very center of each petal, and that will give you the contrast. Sometimes I find doing 2 rounds of the blend can help the detail be a little bit more dominant. So if you'd like to do that, you can always swap back to the R35 and do that sort of detail again. Repeat everything to build up that extra depth. But I'll leave it up to you if that's something you'd like to do. I've got a few little purple blooms as well. So I've got my BDO8 that I'm going to do the same thing on. Going through the center and around the edges. Swapping into my BV000. And then I've got some little orangey yellow hued florals. So my YR68, the same thing through here. And then my Y15 again. Now, one other thing you can do is if you want a little bit more texture, it's absolutely optional. You can always grab a black pencil and come around some of these little details for extra depth. So just to show you what I mean very, very quickly, you grab a black pencil. You can see I've come around the center line and just work between our little petals. Now, I didn't add this into your instructions, but it's just some way that you can add a little bit of extra detail in a smaller area if you find that difficult with your markers. And I just want to show you the difference there, that I've done that with a black pencil versus this one. And just to finish us off, we want to do the space between our foliage, and I've got my YG67. So any little gaps, I'm just coming between and filling that in. So it just looks like we've got leaves underneath all those florals through there. Now I've got one more little thing I'm going to do, and that is a cast shadow beneath my deer. So you can see you can have him floating like this, or you can add a shadow beneath to really ground him. Now that is a cast shadow from the deer standing above our ground. So I grab my W9 and it's going to be darker straight underneath my character. So I'm just doing a nice big thick stroke of the W9 straight underneath him there. And then we're just going to work on fading that out. So I then grab my W5 and I come all around the edges. You can see the shadow extends further back from his feet as well, just showing that he is 3-dimensional and not flat. We then have our W3 and we continue to blend that around. And then my W1. So a shadow always fades out as it gets further away from our object. And very simple, that's how you add your grounding cast shadow around your character. And that is our image today all finished up. So you can see even in this very quick tutorial, we've learned a lot of art foundations already, looking at refining our fine lines technique and how to apply that utilizing light source to create dimension and depth on our images. I really hope that you've enjoyed coloring this one up with me. I'd love to see you all share your coloring, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out anytime at all. I always do free private tutoring in all of my classes, so even if you felt really stuck here today or want to explore some of those concepts in a bit more detail with me, just pop me a message or an email at alyce@keeganclouder.com and let's chat together to help you feel confident on your coloring journey. Thank you so much for joining me and hope to see you in the classrooms.